Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today I'm joined by two powerhouses in the world of M&A integration and long-term value creation, Alex Amsden and Tom Gaunt with BTS. Alex Amsden is Vice President, Head of Growth, Strategy, and Culture Transformation for BTS USA. She leads client engagement across broad-scale change initiatives, including strategy definition and activation, cultural transformation, operating model and ways of working redesign, and M&A integration. Her experience ranges industries from Fortune 50 companies to high-growth firms. Tom Gaunt is Head of Change and Transformation for BTS Europe. For over 15 years, Tom has guided global organizations through strategic shifts, helping them align culture, leadership, and execution. His style emphasizes deep understanding of the organization's context, a relationship-first orientation, continuous refinement, and curiosity. Alex and Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Clint.
Thank you for having us, Clint. Great to be here.
Well, it's fantastic. You know, I've just gotten acquainted with your firm at a conference a few months ago and was just really impressed. And I said, I have to have these guys on the show. So, Alex, I'd love to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do at BTS, and how you see your role in driving post-merger value creation?
Yeah, of course. At BTS, I lead our team in North America that helps clients accelerate results of their most challenging transformation problems, as you articulated already. And I think what makes us different is we do this by linking strategy to the people and culture needed to execute, because we know any strategy is only good as how your people implement it. And as it relates to post-merger value creation, we see clients spend a disproportionate amount of time and energy on what we would call the checklist of structural and process items that, of course, need to get done post-merger. And yet we know that people are a major risk to integration success. So I see our role as helping our clients identify the highest leverage activities they can do to get people both aligned and working better together so that they can hit not only the initial targets, but really drive that long-term value realization.
Great. And I think we're seeing that more and more out there these days, that people really are the drivers of value creation after M&A. Tom, how about you? What about your post-merger integration experience and the work you do at BTS?
Sure. So I'm effectively Alex's counterpart in Europe, so very similar focus in terms of my work, and perhaps particularly as it pertains to this world of post-M&A integration. I've spent the last couple of years working really closely with some large European organizations on the back of transformative acquisitions that they've made. And that's been working at the exec team level and sort of organizational level as well. And I think what I love about this work is that it's a rare opportunity to work with an organization that's kind of pivotal make or break moment, you know, where billions of euros, pounds, or dollars is on the line. And there's also a huge emotional component to this work as well. So whether that's, you know, working with an executive team to try to really understand what is the impact that this is having on them personally, on them as a group? How can we help them to bring clarity and understanding to the organization as a whole? And then working across the organization to think, what can we do to accelerate integration? What are some of the things that we can do to sort of get ahead of the inevitable roadblocks and try to limit the missed opportunities for growth there as well?
Well, so Tom, you've just pointed to this. What are some of the key things that you've seen that help teams make that integration go faster and hopefully help make that change stick?
So I think perhaps I can talk about that on two levels. So I think firstly, when it comes to the team level, we see a lot of value in trying to create experiences up front that actually focus on the human part of that integration first. So I think about one a recent experience where we're facilitating the coming together of two executive teams for the first time. On the agenda, of course, was strategy, were the organizational questions, the synergy targets, and so forth. But what we advocated for was, before we get to any of that, can we actually just spend a little bit of time up front talking about hopes and fears, talking about what's personally on the line for people, trying to build that sense of connection. And I think what that did is it unlocked a different type of conversation in that meeting. And actually the CEO of the acquiring organization at the end of the workshop said, I think had we not started with that, human conversation, we would never have made so much progress when it comes to the really important business and strategy decisions that we had to make as well. So I think that there's something about the sequencing at the exec team level. When it comes to sort of broader principles or what we've seen work, perhaps, thinking about the entire organization as well, there are three core principles that we've identified and that we try to follow. The first is around trying to make vision as practical as possible. And I think the risk here is that we can get lost in theory, we can get lost in the pitfall of wordsmithing. So we try to work to get as quickly as possible from ideas to practical examples. How is this actually going to look in terms of tangible ways of working? Which then links to a second principle that we try to follow, this idea of authorship is ownership. And I think this is particularly true in times of integration where there's a lot of uncertainty. There can be a high degree of fear about what the future looks like. How do we create practical opportunities for people to get their fingers on what that future looks like? And that can be from a culture perspective, people working together to define an aspirational future state culture, or it can be very much on the ways of working, the sort of nuts and bolts of daily work levels. So how can we create spaces for people to practically share what is it they're proud of? What is the continuity they want to see because something is working really well? And how do we bring those two different perspectives together in the new organization? And then the third principle is when we talk about a topic like culture, for example, we always try to do so in a way that talks about it hand in glove with strategy. And too often we see that there are some pitfalls here, either tackling culture too late, saying, we'll get to that after we've, worked on the structural and operational synergies, or actually talking about culture too early, but talking about it in a vacuum. So thinking about culture in terms of engagement, for example, rather than recognizing culture as a critical enabler of what we're ultimately trying to achieve as an organization.
Yeah, I like to think about culture as a set of behaviors, right? Things that we can see, that we can observe. And it always cracks me up when you get companies that have a cultural statement like have fun. This is an example I use all the time. My idea of having fun is hopping on a roller coaster and going in circles until I get sick. My brother's idea of having fun is strapping 70 pounds of gear on his back and walking into the woods and hoping somebody eventually finds him. And to me, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. Mm-hmm. And to people who get motion sick, the roller coasters sound terrible. So we can say have fun, but what do we really mean? How do we activate that? And I love your emphasis on the practical. Alex, how about the flip side? What are some of the things that make transformation not work?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we see in organizations where there are pitfalls around M&A is around kind of moving too fast through some of the critical things that need to get done. So, particularly as we think about executives, right, they've spent a lot of time on the deal rationale up front, on the shared vision, and they often overassume the understanding from the broader organization or the buy-in from the broader organization and think, okay, we have our one slide roadshow, and we're good. We're going to set it and forget it. I had one biopharma company that I worked with who had bought a technology company, and the real deal rationale was that they thought they could expand where they could play in the care continuum and move into more diagnostics and preventative care with the technology paired with some of their biopharma portfolio. And they had been so close to the deal that they didn't spend a lot of time really taking that vision out of their head and helping people see what it meant. So what that resulted in was you had basically the organizations combined and operating still relatively separately. So you had the technology over here and the biopharma over here, and they never really saw that integrated value and expansion across the care continuum in a way that was really meaningful versus just, operating separately. I think the other thing that, was present in that example was assuming that only the acquired company needs to change, which is something we see quite often, right? And if you're a serial acquirer, I think it's even more true. But what that tends to lead to is the acquiring company doesn't spend time actually capturing some of the magic from the organization that they acquired. So in the example of the biopharma company, the technology company was a startup. They were quick. They had lots of agile practices that not always would work in a biopharma context, but they could have taken some of those cultural elements and embedded it in how they worked. And likewise, the technology company didn't know the customers as well or the key players in the biopharma ecosystem, which could have been hugely valuable as they thought about how they went to market with their products. So I think on both sides, really learning from each other and creating that space. I think to Tom's other point, right, the idea of culture and making sure you're tackling that up front and not just over-rotating on the process and tactics is one we see a lot. There's a lot to get done in any type of M&A that is a check-the-box activity. And sometimes the culture side or going slow to go fast feels like a waste of time. And we've seen that show up years later. We had one organization, it was two product technology groups that were coming together and working on a shared product category. And it was a few years down the line and they were missing critical deadlines. There was a lot of disengagement on the team. And we ended up coming in at that point and actually having to almost reset and have them share with each other different ways of working, different strengths, and really recontract on how they needed to work together, which showed immediate benefits in their ability to get things done. And they went through a lot of pain to get there.
Wow. Those are some great examples. Tom, one of the things that I sort of came to know BTS for is this work in simulations. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that. What makes simulation a valuable tool in the post-merger integration journey? And how is that different from standard training, change management, or communications planning?
Yes, simulations. One of the things that we get really excited about, Klint, and maybe to provide a bit of context around what we mean by simulations, because it's a sort of word that can mean very different things to different people. So at BTS, we use different types of simulations to model sort of different altitudes. So this could range from, some of the latest work that we're doing around AI bots to simulate critical conversations. So you can imagine that you dial into a conversation where you maybe have to deliver a difficult change message or feedback or look at demonstrating empathy. We also use scenario type simulations where we place people in situations where they have to respond to critical make or break leadership moments or make or break organizational change moments. And we use that as a platform for people to reflect on how are they going to navigate real organizational change moments that probably have some parallels to the scenarios that we create. And then we also spend a lot of time creating sort of full enterprise simulations. So you can imagine that in an M&A context, what this might do is, or might involve, is modeling the future state of an organization. So company A and company B come together. We try to imagine what the new co might look like 3-10 years down the line, and then use that in order to create an experience where teams can come together and practice formulating and executing strategy for that future organization. And typically we would do this in the form of a workshop. It could last from half a day to 5 days, depending on the sort of appetite and focus we'd want to bring into that experience. Why does this work particularly well, and why are we particularly excited about bringing this type of approach in a post-merger context? In many respects, because it speaks to the principles that we discussed previously. So it's an experience that works on multiple levels, on a sort of emotional and intellectual level. It's a way of also getting really clear on what that future state organization might look like, not in theoretical, but rather in practical terms. And so there are benefits that come just from developing this type of simulation. You can imagine that it means that we need to get executives, perhaps from both organizations, in a room or in a call, and actually hammer things out. What are our priorities? What do we want the future commercial organization to look like in the simulation? To answer that question, we need some degree of alignment in the real world as well. So it's an interesting way of teasing out potential misalignment, putting some of those questions on the table. And then when it comes to actually delivering that type of experience, you can imagine the value as a tool of alignment and strategy dissemination of say having leaders from supply chain from both of the legacy organizations coming together, making decisions in the simulated future organization, and using that as a way to share what they are particularly passionate about, or what they've seen work well or not so well in the past, and then use that as an opportunity to define how they want to work together in the future. And then one other aspect is that these experiences tend to be fast-paced. They tend to be competitive. They tend to be a little bit stressful. So there's also an application where you can use a simulation almost like a kind of leadership laboratory. It brings out real dynamics. And so with coaches, with observers, you can use that as a platform to put on the table team dynamics, hidden assumptions, behaviors that are maybe not conducive to the sort of working rhythm that's required in the future.
That's great. It seems to me that this is the closest you can really get to on-the-job training, right? How many bites at the apple do you really get with a merger integration process? And it seems to me the simulation gives you the best chance you can to doing it without doing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's typically how we would sort of introduce that experience. We talk about the practice to performance ratio, right? And we look at, if you look at high performance in other realms, whether that's, athletics or music, or you look at chess grandmasters, and you think about how much time these individuals and teams that spend practicing versus performing, and then look at in the corporate realm. Think about the fact that for many professionals and many organizations, they may only do one or two transformative acquisitions in the span of their career. Right. And so creating that space to have a bit of practice as well as performance can be hugely valuable in that sense.
Yeah, no, I'm in love with the idea. I teach HRM&A at NYU, and the capstone is I have that group of students do a culture assessment using public records. It's the closest I can do to giving them that real on-the-job experience, so they've got a portfolio piece. And I realize that we're taking that, out of grad school and into professional practice, but they walk away feeling like they've picked up a real skill that they can apply. So, Alex, let's talk timing on these simulations. When are they the most effective? Do you do it before close? Do you do it during integration? Do you wait a year until something's gone off the rails?
I think there's a few places. And of course, before close, there are certain things that you can't discuss with the other side. Strategy is one of them often. So where you can make progress post-close, though, is in ways of working. So if you bring people together and start to talk about some of those examples of how do we each work today, how do we want to work differently, that can give you a jump start on informing what a simulation could look like so that you are ready to go when you hit the close date. I'd say more often we would use them post-close in a few key moments. One moment is, as Tom said, kind of the upfront piece around executives getting aligned on the strategy. So what we can do is model possible different structures, possible different strategic plays for the combined organization, and have the executives actually weigh which are most strategically right for us and what would it actually take to execute. So you can get them a little bit more aligned on how they are going to come together and execute the strategy. Then, of course, that's a great input into maybe the most common place we use simulations, which is really launching new co. So that's often, a kickoff event or something in the first 100 days where you're giving leaders and on both sides a chance to experience that shared future together and also get to know each other, as Tom mentioned, Nothing makes you closer than a little competition and time pressure. So this could be either a high fidelity strategy simulation where you're practicing executing the future strategy in a dynamic marketplace. And in that case, the leaders really do see what the strategy means in action and how they fit in. This could also be modeling how we want to work together as a shared company. So things like, how do our shared values actually show up in key moments when we interact with the customer, when we make key decisions, when we collaborate, for example. As you said, Klint, right? People have different understandings of what those might look like. So getting them really clear on what it looks like here and in our future is important. And then as we think about after, maybe the first 100 days or maybe around that period, we've also used them quite a lot with critical teams where we know they'll be coming together, they'll have significant overlap and need to figure out how to work together after integration. So we can use simulations in that sense to help model out their operating rhythm and how they need to work differently, what key success metrics they need to drive. Sales organizations is a great example of this, where you have, sales teams that need to combine their product portfolios and go to market together. You can actually look at the touch points on the customer journey and say, hey, where do we need to pair together? Where might we need to have a critical handoff that we didn't have before? So it's a way of allowing them to kind of create new operating principles around that. We've also done it quite a bit for manufacturing teams coming together. If we look at, their operating cadence, their standard operating procedures, how do we help them come together and kind of define how they work together as well?
And I'm curious, how is that different, Alex, than a more traditional workshop where you bring everybody into the room to kind of talk through these things and then develop a cadence? How is the simulation experience different?
Yeah, great question. I think really it's about bringing it down to the practical level of detail and the examples of where it would show up. So for example, I think we all would say we're innovative, right? Directionally, we're innovative. And then if you get down to a moment in time where a team member brings you a new disruptive idea that may change your priorities slightly, are you shooting down that idea? Are you asking more questions about that idea? How do we weigh if we want to take that idea forward? All of a sudden, you get a bunch of shared assumptions on the table from both sides on how they've done things in the past, how do we need to do them in the future. So it really just serves as a ground for them to surface those assumptions, really discuss and debate, get to the heart of the issue, and come to alignment together on really how they would want to handle that in the future.
Got it. Thank you. So, Tom, anything that you would add about the timing or design or simulation scale?
I think Alex has given a pretty comprehensive run through of the sort of different, moments and how we use simulations based on the time frame. Perhaps the one thing I'd add here is that what's really interesting is that often the process of creating or running the simulation actually throws up examples of legacy misalignment, or you might say integration debt, even from, acquisitions, integrations that were quite far in the past. And this can range from language, how people describe themselves, their products, the organization they work for, right through to assumptions and ways of working that actually have a pretty significant impact on results and what happens in the organization. So I was thinking back to one technology company that we worked quite extensively with. They had made a big acquisition many years ago, but in building the simulation, what we realized is that there were some fundamental disconnects in terms of the attitude towards customers and sales. And they were driven by the fact that that legacy company that was acquired had quite a distinct market position due to the extremely close relationship, almost symbiotic relationship it had with some very large organizations in its home market, which then drove very different attitudes towards sales, very different behaviors in terms of sales, and that was having a bit of an impact. And the process of sort of bringing that out through the simulation experience was really helpful in terms of putting that on the table, giving people space and time to discuss and deal with those sorts of challenges.
It makes a ton of sense. I had a guest on, a while back. We had both worked for Boeing, and we were there 25 years after the McDonnell Douglas acquisition, and we were still seeing the echoes of that acquisition integration decades after. And There's also some HBR research that shows that leaders from acquisitions are more likely to leave even a decade after that culture shift. So those long echoes are definitely a thing. Alex, I'd love to hear a success story. So can maybe tell me about a time when you had a pilot or a small group and it went so well that your client said, hey, we should do more of this? I'd love to hear what that was like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we worked with one tech organization as they scaled their business over time and went from, a few thousand people to, 100,000 people in their organization. And one thing that we helped them with in that sense was that they had used M&A as a strategic growth play for them in terms of scaling their business. So they had over time bought, probably 20 different companies at that point. And what they started realizing is that as they bought more companies, the sales methodologies for different parts of the world were quite different, as well as their go-to-market approach. And to get to scale and consistent customer experience, they really needed to unify that if they were going to continue to scale. So they co-created a simulation with us that really brought to life a new unified go-to-market methodology that they had defined. And we worked with the executives to get it right, to take them through it, to make sure that we pressure tested some of the challenges that might come up from across the world. And that went so well that we ended up scaling that across 30,000 people in 3 days.
Wow.
So it was, for their large, annual sales kickoff, they said, hey, we really want to roll this out. We want this to be a catalyst for people to start working differently immediately. So in 3 days, we hit 30,000 people. And of course, that's massive scale, but it shows what codifying something like that in a simulation can do and giving people a little bit of that practice cycle in one day that if we didn't do it in a simulation, probably would have taken months on the job and months to disseminate across geographies.
That's a really significant investment in time and effort. How did it work out? What were the results of that 30,000 person simulation?
Yeah, they saw significant uplift in their sales pipeline as a result of that. And they also saw much more customer satisfaction in the interactions with their customers, because what they were doing as part of that go-to-market methodology was taking a lot of the sub products and kind of ill-defined sales roles and getting really crisp on when in the customer journey do I come in? What does it look like for us to partner together? And how do we really make sure the customer's business and customer value is in mind? So better customer experience, uplift in their sales pipeline, I think as a result mainly of expanding the deal size because they were able to come together much better.
That's terrific. Tom, how about for you? Do you have a case or an example where a simulation really made a difference in value capture for one of your clients?
I would say it's interesting because I think Alex has sort of spoken about the advantages of doing something very quickly, right? 3 days, 30,000 people is a sort of shot of alignment. The example that comes to mind for me is more of a sort of long-term deployment of a simulation. So we worked with an organization that was looking at completely transforming its business model. And as part of this, there was a transition to what they refer to as a consumer-centric organization. So they were introducing things like Net Promoter Score, a consumer journey that the organization hadn't ever really talked about before. And this was happening in a multinational that had grown in many respects through acquisitions, particularly if you were to look at their business units across different geographies. What we used the simulation for here was it was a critical step in the sort of transformation activation approach across each of the organization's markets. So you can imagine that there's a sort of process that they would go through in terms of, the hardware of the transformation, the understanding of new concepts, and then the simulation came in as the vehicle for alignment as a vehicle for actually practicing what it means to, make decisions based upon a robust understanding of a consumer journey, to understand concepts like consumer acquisition costs, lifetime value, so on and so forth. I mentioned the time frame here. So what was advantageous is that we were able to therefore first take the simulation to this organization's pioneering markets, the markets that were rolling this transformation out for the first time. And that allowed us to take advantage of this sort of snowballing effect of learning, because we went to those pioneering markets, we gathered stories on what was working, what didn't work, how are consumers reacting, what are they seeing in that particular market context. And then we could bake that into subsequent iterations of the simulation. So by the time we went to the 10th market, for example, we have 9 fantastic case studies, we have 9 sets of lessons learned, and we're able to make the experience a lot richer, and also in some ways use it as a way of transferring organizational knowledge in a way that makes it easier for people to accept, perhaps, because rather than just, telling people this is how it is or sharing case studies in a static way, you can actually create space for people to make the same mistakes that their colleagues had made perhaps 6 months ago in a different market, and then use that as a platform to bring the story and the example to life. So this is really part of a transformation initiative that's completely overhauled how this organization operates. If you were to look at their product mix now, it's completely shifted as well. So part of a really interesting transformation story.
That's fantastic. One of the things that I'm hearing that I just want to confirm, I'm almost hearing that you shape the simulation really to the culture of the company. Having worked for a big SaaS company, they really like their big bang out the gate, move fast, break things type of culture. And Alex, I almost hear that with your client, where Tom, your client was, a little bit more methodical, probably slower product sales cycles, and so that slow and steady wins the race was more culturally appropriate for them. So, am I picking up on that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think core to our approach is that we avoid a kind of cookie cutter, one size fits all take on building simulations. So our typical simulations will really be built from the ground up based upon an organization's strategy and culture. Of course, we bring our experience, the knowledge from having done it before in perhaps similar companies or sectors. But we find that it's actually quite difficult to replicate a model from one company to another, because once you start to scratch the surface and get into the details, you realize there are lots of cultural nuances, or perhaps nuances in terms of, KPIs or the particular finances of the business that make it very difficult to take a uniform approach. I think also that, like you say, there are certain cultural styles in terms of whether people just want to move at pace and do things quickly, or if people want a little bit more time to reflect, perhaps bring more theory into the experience as well.
That makes complete sense. So, Alex, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how AI, digital twins, immersive environments. I know that I've seen some companies that have those, VR headsets that they're using. So how do you see that evolving the way simulations work in the future?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing the impact of AI on the speed in which we can spin up a simulation. We can now vibe code a prototype in a few hours, which makes it much more dynamic for our clients and also puts them more in control because they can edit more of the inputs in real time. We've also, seen how AI can start to connect to other data sources, summarize insights and decisions much faster, surface points of misalignment in real time. So the richness you can get in some of those moments where you're, bringing people together, which are high stakes anyway, is just increasing exponentially. And I think, if we think about things like digital twins, for example, this idea of real-time strategy labs where clients could test drive decisions using live operational data in real time and get input to decide which direction they want to go in is really interesting. They could, we could have AI models that are continuously learning from the organization's data and really allowing for that adaptive scenario planning, which I think, again, if we think about cutting down the time and increasing the richness and effectiveness of discussions, that can be really powerful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Tom, how about for you? What is a frontier or opportunity in simulation design that you find exciting?
I think Alex has spoken really nicely about the opportunities afforded almost by that kind of digital twin approach, perhaps using simulations in the flow of work to practice decisions. If we were to think about simulations, more in that kind of set piece format, so perhaps in a workshop, a specific experience, I think here the possibilities are really exciting in terms of the sort of high fidelity experience that you can create, but one that challenges people very much on a sort of intellectual and emotional level. So the idea of perhaps having a group together, maybe initially making some really tough decisions about capital allocation, and then all of a sudden the screen, if you like, switching to an investor relations presentation where they need to justify some decisions they've made to a group of analysts who are AI bots, but able to respond quickly and also with an awareness of all of the decisions that they've made previously in the simulation. And then to be transported into another room where they need to explain and justify and talk about the implications for a representative group of employees. You can see how in that little sort of vignette, you really have an opportunity to bring strategy and culture together in a seamless way that up until now hasn't been as easily achievable in that sort of simulation format. So it's exciting that today the technology exists to do that. It's a case of just bringing it together in a way that ensures we don't lose sight of the sort of end in mind and why we're creating these experiences as well.
Right. Keep that human piece alive. Well, so Tom, as we begin to wrap up, we'll keep you on the floor here. So do you have a lesson learned? Do you have a best practice? Just what's the one tip if you were to share with somebody thinking about doing simulations in their post-merger integration work? What would that tip be?
I think we touched on maybe one of them just there in that human factor. And I think it's a real risk that in today's environment, with all of the cool things that we can do with technology, that we perhaps take our eye off the ball of personalities and politics. And where I've seen things perhaps not go as well as they could have, oftentimes it's just a breakdown in terms of our ability to truly understand that context, to understand relationships, to understand who it is that we need to engage with at a different point. So I think there's that kind of human element. The second aspect, if I could share one more point, would be around not overcomplicating things. People are busy. People are overwhelmed. People are living through this sort of constant change, and it's creating a certain degree of exhaustion. So we need to avoid falling into the trap of using everything that we have available to us and thinking about that sort of prioritization and simplicity as well.
Oh, great tips. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think about using something like a simulation as a tool in integration, it's a little bit of a different way to support organizations. So you really do need to position the benefit in a way that would help business leaders understand why we would invest in that, right? It is a little counterintuitive in that, you're investing more time probably in the alignment up front and bringing people together. And I think you really need to connect that to the benefits that you'll see in the deal process and the outcomes versus just, talking about some of the how. So that's one piece I think we've seen a lot of our clients struggle with as it relates to just selling something like a simulation internally, is that you really do need to connect it to the business results. And if you do, I think what it allows the HR integration leads to do is have a little bit of a different seat at the table in the process. So, if you think about business execs, right, they typically are don't love talking about things that are high level and esoteric like culture. All of a sudden, if we can take it to examples where there's friction and how we're going to solve those examples faster, it makes it much more actionable for the leaders and they can see how it would help them. it also gives them a seat at the table as it comes to strategy alignment, right? So sometimes we see in organizations, there's kind of the culture or HR people side of the integration, and then there's the strategy side or the business side of the integration. And I think being able to bring those together is critically important so that, as Tom mentioned earlier, they're not in a vacuum. So having the simulation lever can really give the HR and integration teams a seat at the table to say, hey, you can create a great strategy, and if no one executes it, it's no good. So we can help you solve that problem faster with a simulation. And then I think, if we think about just traditional change management and knowing that everyone's on a change curve, letting people actually experience the future and coming to their own reason for the change and the why just helps people adopt it faster. And I think simulations are the fastest way to do that.
Oh, fantastic. And I will say the advice to be able to connect your actions to business outcomes is just general good advice inside or outside the simulation context.
Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah. Well, so Alex, as we close, what's the best way for listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, would love, of course, to connect with anyone on LinkedIn, Alex Amsden, Tom Gaunt. You can look us up. Klint, I don't know if you can also include our emails in the show notes. And, if anyone is interested, sparked in simulation, happy to be a thought partner and help you think through that if you just want to shoot Tom and I an email.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure that those end up in the show notes along with links to your LinkedIn profiles. So, Alex, Tom, thank you both.
Thank you very much, Klint. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.